and welcome to the launch of the fourth Status of Gender on JSE-listed boards research undertaken by Business Engage in collaboration with the 30% Club South Africa, Nedbank, the Institute of Directors, South Africa, and Tuesday Consulting. My name is Keshni Govender. I'm the Executive Head for Transformation and Strategy at Nedbank Limited, and I am going to be your MC today. You can follow us on Gender Report 2020. That's with a capital G and capital R. So it's Gender Report 2020. The report can be found on www.businessengage.co.za. This report will be available from 13:30 today and the annexures in the next few days. We are honored to have a number of guests joining us today, both in studio and online. We will introduce them fully as we go along. Let's have a quick look at the program for the next approximately hour and a half that we will be with you. Due to the timing constraints with our first two guests, we are going to get moving straight away. Whilst you are looking at the program, let me introduce you to Elena Filipova, who is joining us from Zurich, Switzerland. Elena is Director for Sustainable Finance, Data and Analytics at the London Stock Exchange Group. Elena is also responsible for driving the integration of ESG, green and sustainable data, insights and analytics into the different products, services, and client propositions across LSEG's Data and Analytics division. That's quite a great portfolio. We have invited Elena to introduce us to the key factors driving diverse and inclusive workplaces report, the second annual publication by Refinitiv. The primary objective of the report is to raise awareness on the topic of diversity and inclusion, otherwise known as D&I, analyze the data to assess progress made and its direct impact on corporate financial performance. We feel that you can't look at any of the research that we are currently doing in isolation. It has to be seen in the context of a wider environment that we operate in. Elena, thank you very much for joining us this year, and over to you.
Thank you as well, and good day, everyone. I hope technology is on our side today. And I was hoping also to share a couple of slides, if that's okay with everyone. Let me just give it a go. I hope that sharing content is going to work okay. Would it be okay to just confirm that my slides are coming through clear?
Yes, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So let me just spend a moment really talking about the importance of diversity, because this topic is extremely relevant, more relevant than ever so in today's very volatile and dynamic environment in which we operate. We believe that diversity is what enables innovations. It's what enables diversity in opinion and better decision making, and it's a prerequisite for growth. Diversity is really what enables recovery and resilience as global markets are recovering from one of the worst pandemic that we've seen hitting the markets, our societies, communities in decades. Diversity is really playing a critical role to enable businesses, society, and economy move quickly back on the road to recovery. And there are numerous examples actually where amazing women have led countries, businesses, and institutions back to the trajectory of growth, whereas their peers are struggling. So there is a lot of testament in the market that is really enabling us to believe that this is true. And diversity is the basis on which companies are able to respond to the very fast and changing needs of different stakeholder groups. This includes customers and shifting customer demands and needs and requirements, investors and investors having broader expectations from their assets and investable companies and opportunities to not only deliver pure financial results comparable to the market and the benchmark, but actually have a positive impact. So the landscape in which businesses operate is changing at a pace that I think no one expected. And diversity is the key ingredient that enables companies to flourish at time of change. I think that it's also important to mention that we at Refinitiv have been pioneers in this agenda, not only through our own footprint as a business and operations, but actually more importantly through the ability to influence change in the global financial markets through our products, services, and data. We've also witnessed in the last 18 months or so an elevated interest in the area of diversity and inclusiveness, especially in the investment community. I think that at times we feel that climate change and the crisis we're facing from a climate perspective overshadows some of the other social dimensions, which actually are critically important and as important not only to solve the climate crisis, but actually to enable us to move to a more sustainable future, to a more sustainable economy and more sustainable businesses. However, what we are also seeing in the last 12 to 18 months is that based on data, there is indeed progress being made, but progress is not happening quickly enough, and actually it's stalling in some areas. And that's somewhat concerning, and we do analyze this trend in more detail in our report. In 2016, we launched the Diversity and Inclusion Index, which ranks the top publicly listed most diverse and inclusive companies around the world around four main issues. Diversity, of course, is at the heart of it, but inclusiveness and inclusive workplaces is a second pillar. We also look at the broader people development characteristics of businesses and their exposure to diversity and inclusiveness related controversies and scandals. So I really wanted to spend a few minutes to show you a couple of numbers from our work. And I think that will enable a bit of a more insightful conversation later today, as well as hopefully empower you to ask the right questions, to challenge data, challenge companies and businesses, and have a positive impact while you generate superior financial performance. So it's really important, especially for us as a data provider and the industry that is powered by data, to start off by highlighting the importance of disclosure. Data is really important because without transparency, there is little accountability and inability to act. You need the data to set targets, to measure progress, and to hold yourself and others accountable to meeting these targets. Data is also what informs capital allocation. And we've seen the growth of the sustainable economy, and more and more global capital is being channeled towards sustainable businesses. But how do you measure those sustainable businesses? How do you identify where are the opportunities, where are the assets to allocate and shift that capital towards? It's a big challenge that the industry is facing right now, and it's underpinned by the fact that there are data availability gaps. And this is true in the area of diversity and inclusiveness as well. Data enables the creation of financial products. The industry operates through financial instruments and products, and without them, it is practically impossible for that shift in capital that's so needed to enable a more sustainable economy. And as mentioned, it's the mean through which we're able to measure progress and hold ourselves accountable. Our annual report that goes into the data and really helps users and readers of the report to be really empowered by facts was the second review that we did this year, and it has a global focus. However, we did extract a couple of metrics and graphs relevant to this conversation. And the first observation on a global scale is that South African companies are performing relatively well. Amongst the country ranking that we produce, we see that South Africa ranks fourth, and the universe of companies with a diversity and inclusion score is over 100. So that's a relatively substantial universe. It's worth mentioning that many companies do not even qualify for a D&I score because there is significant lack in disclosure. So having the data publicly available is actually a prerequisite to be even considered in a ranking like the Refinitiv D&I index, which then informs a number of mainstream financial products and ETFs. More importantly, we do ask the question, how does the pipeline for female on board and executives looks like? Because to groom and develop a healthy pipeline, you do need to look at the business ladder, the hierarchy of the organizations, and assess how companies are actually developing those talent. Because you cannot expect to be able to deliver superior improvements at the top of the organization unless you are developing that healthy pipeline below. And from a South African perspective, we do see a good reverse pyramid look at an average, at an aggregated view. But clearly, risks and challenges tend to not be elevated at the surface. They tend to be beneath the waterline, so to speak, into individual sectors, into individual companies. So that's why digging into the data further is very important to enable better risk management and addressing the question about the pipeline. We also wanted to analyze, and from our perspective, we do see quite a lot of greenwashing in the area of diversity. I would call it social washing, or companies really starting this journey with a policy, for example, but not truly building the processes, mechanisms in place to enable true change within the organizations. So within our ESG data, we capture individual different data points, which when analyzed together, enable us to have a better holistic view of the seriousness, robustness, and materiality on which a company is currently sitting. So we see all of the ESG areas as a journey, as a curve, and we try to assess where companies are on this curve to then be able to better score and compare them against each other. So when we look at how many companies within the market have a diversity policy, the number of companies is quite high. Pretty much all companies in the region are acknowledging the importance of diversity and inclusiveness in the workforce. But when we ask them, how do you do it? Do you have measurable objectives and targets? You see that the number drops significantly. And I will let the audience make conclusions off of this number. And it goes without saying that diversity is not only the right thing to do from an ethical or socially ethical perspective. It's actually becoming a prerequisite to do well financially, and it makes good business sense. We've analyzed our diversity and inclusion index against a variety of benchmarks over the years, and we observe continuous outperformance both on the short term and the long term financial metrics. For this analysis, what we actually wanted to zoom into was an individual metric and construct two types of portfolios. One is a portfolio of companies that has no gender pay gap. So a female and a male performing the same role will be, broadly speaking, paid the same amount. And the second portfolio is companies with significant gender pay gap or a material gender pay gap. And you can see the analysis of the cumulative returns of the two portfolios. And interestingly enough, as I mentioned, we do see more accelerated interest from the investment community on this topic in the last 12, 18 months, really, since the COVID pandemic started. And this is also visible in this chart. We see that the delta between the two portfolios is widening since the beginning of last year. So I hope this is providing you some seats for further conversations. It gives you a bit of a context from a global perspective. With that, I thank you very much for your time, and we'll pass it back to the studio.
Thank you very much, Elena, for those insights. So certainly, diversity a prerequisite for growth. Great insight, and good to know that SA is performing well relatively to other countries. So next up, we have Malcolm Lawson from Business Engage to go through the report. As many of you will know, Malcolm is responsible for producing the report, and he has emceed this event up until now. How are you, Malcolm?
I'm very well, thank you, Kirsty. But before we go to me, we're going to go to Zulu and to Sarah. So I think let's have a look at the one and dones first, and the 0 to 0s.
Okay, great.
And 0 to 1s rather.
Thank you very much. So, no, now we are on another thing, Malcolm, sorry. Apologies for this. So the one and done, this has been occasioned by the UK Hampton Alexander Review and a few years back, wherein it noted that the number of UK companies appear to have taken a one and done attitude, which the review felt was not much better than no woman at all. Our research takes a different view in that quite often, to get from 0 to 2 and more, you first need to get to 1. So quite an interesting concept. To discuss the challenges of getting from 0 to 1 is Solo Nketane from our partners Tuesday Consulting, who is in conversation with Sarah Sonnenberg, the lead independent director of Bowler Metcalf. So Solo and Sarah, over to you and welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Malcolm, and everyone at the studio. Good afternoon. As introduced, my name is Tsulu Nketane, Director at Tuesday Consulting, which are co-founders of the co-founding members of the 30% Club Southern Africa. Tuesday Consulting has contributed to the qualitative aspect of the research in the 2019 and 2020 report. To achieve this, we partnered with an independent researcher and part-time lecturer from the University of Stellenbosch Business School. The focus of the research on 2020 was getting insights from the JSE-listed companies with 0 to 1% female representation on their boards, including exploring the recruitment, development, and retention practices at board level. Today, we have invited Sarah Sonnenberg to join us. Sarah, as introduced, is a lead independent director of Bowler Metcalf and MD of Synchron Markings. Bowler Metcalf was formed in 1972, listed on the JSE in 1987. The company manufactures plastic packaging for the toiletry, cosmetics, household, pharmaceutical, and food sector. Thank you for joining us, Sarah, and agreeing to discuss this important transformation issue at board level. I know we only have limited time, about 10 minutes, and we'll speed it up and kick off with the questions.
Super.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. To kick it off, Sarah, on the overall, in your opinion, what are company governed by the diversity policy, or is it a continuous exercise to ensure board representation of communities and customers they serve?
So it's an interesting question that got me thinking. So I think if one has a look at how policies are formed in most companies, therein lies your starting point. If it's a tick box exercise where someone's setting the policy and pushing it out, it doesn't become part of the culture. So I think if it's a collective and consultative process to develop policy and becomes part of the decision making in the culture, then it's an ongoing and continuous exercise to strive for diversity of thought, first and foremost, which will then cascade into diversity of gender, culture, ethnicity, religious groups, and age. And obviously in this context, gender being an important aspect of that.
Great. So then to what extent does the implementation of gender policy influence the process of non-executive director appointment? For instance, is the policy taken into consideration for all board appointments or only certain appointments?
So the policy always has to be considered front and foremost, but that also needs to be seen in context of all stakeholder interests. And that's set in in good governance structures within the organization. And so I think important to consider at all times, and then also to have a look at the needs of the organization at that particular point in time and what the stakeholders are requiring in terms of delivery. So certainly it's there. Companies that don't have it and don't let it steer their decision making, and that they're robustly questioning it at the time of appointment, I don't think are looking after their stakeholder interests and the succession of stakeholders going forward.
Yeah, great. So what I'm hearing, I think from the onset, is that it's not a tick box exercise. It's consultative. It's a process, but policy obviously have to considered within context, right? So what then are the consideration boards have in appointing non-executive directors broadly when they're bringing on somebody?
So when appointing a non-executive director, one has to kind of stand back because it's not a short-term appointment. When one's looking at bringing in a non-executive director, it's normally to fulfill a very specific role. And one has to look at where the company is positioned within the market, where the market's going, and what the needs of that market are, and how one's positioned to fulfill those requirements. That and superimposing it on where the board is in terms of skill base, experience, and representing the future needs of the company. You need to take all that into consideration, and then define what kind of non-executive director you're looking for.
Yeah, quite a complex process, I would imagine, and obviously multiple factors to be considered. Then, whilst looking at that, then what are the benefits then, if any, are associated with gender diversity at the boardroom, and what are the advantages, if any, does a lack of gender diversity on a board represent for companies?
So I think in this day and age, if a company is not actively looking at diversity, they're going to become redundant. And when we're looking at diversity, again, it's the genders is critical. I think women and men, just in our fundamental, we're fundamentally different, and those differences need to be celebrated. We bring different perspectives into play, and we see things sometimes from different angles, and I think that very importantly, if we're sensitive to this and we celebrate the differences in approach and thinking, it forms a basis on which future talent can be attracted into an organization, because you have then a mentorship structure that you can potentially leverage off. So I think the advantages so outweigh the disadvantages. There's almost no point talking about the disadvantages, because I think you just really redundant.
Yeah.
Going forward, and I just don't know how one really looks towards actively servicing the needs of a marketplace without diversity. And it's especially if you take in the context of someone like Bolo Metcalf, their end users are servicing the FMCG, which it's majority women who are purchasing those goods. So you need a female perspective.
Interesting. I mean, our research, as I said in my opening, was that we focused on listed companies with 0 to 1% female representation on boards. What options are available then to such companies to progress the gender diversity on their boards?
So I think this is a massive challenge. I think that women in our development through our careers don't really think of sitting on boards, or alerted to the options of sitting on boards. So I think definitely as women, if we're sitting on either private or listed companies' boards, we need to start sponsoring other young women, and developing a talent pool that can feed through for future consideration. So I think it's incumbent on us as women. I think we need female sponsors, but we also need male sponsors. And that even in our tertiary education process, that we talk about management, but we don't talk about directorships. And the value that we can bring in the pursuit of directorships. And it's interesting, I speak to other women in countries like America, they actively go and pursue sitting on the boards of companies so that they can enrich their own knowledge. And they're doing, also bring that back into other organizations. So I would like to advocate far more strongly that as women, we look to doing it just to enrich our own knowledge base and sponsor young women.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Sarah, for all that, the insights and your opinion that you've put forward. Appreciate your time. And, hopefully with many companies that are listening would take these discussions in their boardrooms, and hopefully we will see the progress of transformation happen quite soon and have a different conversation.
Super. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Keep well. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much, ladies. And certainly, without gender diversity, we will become redundant. I love that. So, moving on now to the launch of the research itself, which will be followed by a panel discussion. For this section of the proceedings, I'm going to hand over to Malcolm. Thank you, Malcolm.
Kashrini, thank you very, very, very much for that. And thank you to Ilana, and thank you to Solo and to Sarah for their insights just now. I just want to start off by doing a number of thank yous. As Kashrini says right at the beginning, we had to move straight into the report because or the proceedings because of time constraints with both Ilana and with Sarah. So I'd just like to thank our partners, the Institute of Directors South Africa, Tuesday Consulting, who you've just heard from, for Eventcast, for the studios. As many of you will know, we use the Eventcast studios for a lot of the stuff that we do, and thank you to the guys there. And a big thank you to Fano Mateo. Now, Fano does all the hard work in this, the research report. And I've got a request for you before we move off Fano. Fano started with us as an intern. He then joined us. He then moved on for a much better salary, to be honest. And he is now in a position where the position that he went to is no longer available. So Fano is now looking for more employment. So if anybody is looking for an honest, incredibly reliable, and just hell of a nice guy, please get hold of me and I'll give you his details, and that will be great. Then thank you to Kashini for emceeing for us today, and to Nedbank, who are going to be joining us. Nedbank will be officially sponsoring the research as from next year, and we look forward to adding them as a partner. Ilana and Sarah have done a great job in setting the scene for us. It is so important that we do not take a too narrow view of the role of business leadership within a society and how the balance within that leadership plays out. And before I get into the report itself, and I promise it's not death by PowerPoint, I want to make reference, as I have done in the past, to the Hampton-Alexander report from the UK. Like the Lord Davies Commission before it, the Hampton-Alexander Commission was set up for a 5-year period. That period terminated earlier this year, and the Commission has made a number of observations and recommendations. And I want to start off by reading the most interesting observation from their final report. And that's Sir Philip Hampton says, whether another review is established will be a matter for the ministers. A case for a similarly commissioned review is much less clear now than it was 5 to 10 years ago. Now, what he's saying, well, what I believe that he is saying with that, is that when Lord Davies finished his commission, there was clearly a lot of work still to do, bearing in mind that in the UK, like us, it's voluntary with regards to the gender situation on boards. What Sir Philip Hampton is saying now is that after 10 years, is that maybe another commission is not the right way to go, and that other mechanisms to keep the momentum going is what is really, really needed in the UK. So we will see how that pans out in the future. But he also notes that there are no longer any all-male boards on the FTSE 350. We certainly can't say the same here. Women now make around 40% in aggregate of the non-executive directors on the FTSE 350 boards. However, there's a continuing challenge in the proportion of senior women executives on boards, since they represent only 14% of the executive directors of the FTSE 100. Remember that figure, I'm going to come back to it. And on the FTSE 100, around 2/3 of all available roles are still going to men, resulting in relatively slow progress overall. So now let's have a look at the research. Sorry. Okay, so as you all know, if you've watched the research over the years, this is based on the 2020 integrated annual reports. This year there was a total of 332 companies on the JSE Stock Exchange and the Altex when we looked at it. 18 were suspended at the time, 17 had no integrated annual reports, 2 are covered by companies within another group, so we ended up analysing 295 companies. 62 companies specifically did not report on gender at board level. Now, this may seem worrying in that the figure has gone up from the last couple of years, But it also could be a case of, well, rather than saying what we're doing, we're actually doing it and getting on with it. But that is something that we will have a look at very clearly over the next couple of years. It also should be pointed out that a number of other companies report, but really do not say very much, and they're actually very opaque with their reporting. And 7 companies have actually never said anything since the requirement started in 1st of January 2017. So this year we're saying that there's an opportunity for 57 women on boards, and each year we advise on the opportunities for women on the boards. You will see in the report that there are 74 positions that have been filled that were previously noted in 52 companies. So positions are getting filled over the time. But the issue of filling board positions, like life, can get very, very complicated. And when we said earlier that when talking about the London Stock Exchange Refinitiv report, that you can't just look in isolation into that research, then we want to now deviate slightly and just show you that in the 295 companies reviewed, there was 2,763 board members in total. Of those, 74% of them were male and 26% of them was female. But when you actually then break it down, in the total 74-26, for executive directors, 86% male, 14% female. As I said, we're going to come back to what Hamilton Alexander said about the 14% with the executives. And then with the non-executives, we looked at 70% male and 70% male and 30% female. But what we did was we decided this year, when we were looking at the number of positions that have been filled, it started getting very, very confusing. So what we looked at, we says from 2019 to 2020, what are the board changes? So there was 88 companies that didn't change their board during those 2 reporting periods at all. 195 companies did change their boards. Now, that's a lot of changes, or a lot of companies changing. And then 12 that we didn't compare. That'd be companies like 91 and Postos and Naspers. So companies that increased their executive directors and appointed, there was 24 male appointments and 17 female appointments. Boards that decreased their executive directors, and we don't go into the reasons for the increases and the decreases at all, it's just the facts. 48 male executive directors departed during the year, as opposed to 17 female executive directors during the period. For non-executive directors, there was an increase in 80 male non-executive directors and 67 female non-executive directors. And then in the decrease in non-executive directors, there was 101 male non-executive directors decreased on the boards and 42 female non-executive directors. Now, when you compare those figures to what they're saying in the UK, where they're saying that 2/3 of the appointments are going to male and 1/3 female, you see that we are not following that trend. We're not saying that it's equal, but it's certainly a nearer to parity on the appointments than in the UK, and certainly in the decreases. There's a lot more male decreases rather than females, and that's something that we'll probably monitor over the next couple of years. So again, so in percentages, the male to female percentages Yeah, plus and minus. Yeah, we're much, much closer than they are in the UK. Then also of interest, what I would also like to point out is that we note in the research document that Mediclinic Limited reports that since the report on improving the gender balance in FTSE leadership, because don't forget they're listed on the London Stock Exchange as well, but leadership issued by the Hampton Alexander Review in November 2016, 4 out of 6 appointments to the board of the company went to female candidates. Likewise, NASPERS notes that over the last 3 years, all new appointments of directors have been women. So there are certain instances where they are taking this, the gender at board level very, very seriously. Okay, so then in terms of targets, 95 companies have set targets. Elena did mention, touch on that as well. 60 of them have achieved targets, and 16 companies have specifically said they've got no intention of sort of setting any targets at all. And I think when we come to the panel discussion, targets is one of the areas that we will look at. And then the one that causes the most conversations, I've said to you that there are no women on boards, or no boards in the FTSE 100. That is all male. Now we've got there's no women on boards is 32, and that is no real change since we started the research. It's moved very, 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 very slightly. That may be a concern or something that we must really be looking at. The one and dones, as we call them, that we say may not be one and done, is 58, which is up from 8 last year. And we note that this report is a category that we believe still has to play out. So I don't think that we should be too concerned with regards to that at this moment. And then, if you watch us on a regular basis, we always end up on a high. We don't end up on the bad news, is that in terms of parity, there's now 26 companies with parity or more, and there's 67 companies with near parity. When we talk about near parity, what we mean by that is they only have to make one move from a male director to a female director to then reach parity in that regard. And as we always say, we're making no comment as to whether those companies intend doing that. All we're saying is that if they do, then they're going to hit parity. So we know it's unlikely to happen, but if all of them did that, we'd be up to 90-odd companies on the stock exchange that reaches the parity. So that's all from me, Shini, and now back over to you, and thank you.
Sure, thank you, Malcolm. A lot of food for thought there, and I'm not really sure about the no death by PowerPoint, but all good information. Thanks very much. I think interesting to just acknowledge there are no longer any all-male boards in FTSE 350. And of course, we cannot say that yet in South Africa, but I think suffice to say we are making progress in terms of the one and done being up, as well as SA being closer to parity. So, thanks, guys. We would now like to welcome our panel to unpack the current board environment. We have 2 guests joining us in studio and 2 are joining us online. So whilst our studio guests join, let me first introduce Amelia Beattie and Cynthia Pongweni, who are actually online. Welcome, ladies. Amelia is currently the CEO of the JSE-listed Liberty 2 Degrees, and Cynthia is the Chief Financial Officer at the Mine Workers Investment Company. So a very warm welcome to the 2 of you. And joining us here in studio, we have the Dr. Jerry Goulier, who is the CEO of the Institute of People Management. Welcome to you, Dr. Jerry.
Thank you.
And then, of course, we have Lerato. Nice to see you again, Lerato. And Lerato is the MD of Chromatic Consulting, and both Jerry and Lerato are D&I experts. Lorato is also a current participant on the Business Engage Board Masterclass series. So welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Great. So I guess to kick off, we will probably start off with Amelia. So firstly, to say thank you to the panel for joining us. And let's go to, yes, if we can please go to you, Amelia.
Sure.
So are we actually making headway at a sustainable rate? What would be your view?
I think that as we look at the numbers, and you define sustainability as something that continues to increase and make things better, I think there's a lot of work to do to make headway. I think, the thing that we should really strive for is the place where the FTSE is, where there are no companies with no women boards. I think that for me is the biggest tragedy in South Africa, is that we have boards with no women on. That diversity is what brings a certain richness to environments, and it's incredibly important to, as we drive all the ESG implementation in the listed environment, that we get that diversity, richness, and inclusion going. But I do think, I always say that it is important to celebrate the improvements that we've made, because those don't just happen by themselves. They happen by deliberate actions and people really doing something about it. And then, and we can maybe unpack that in a minute, but the really important thing for me is around making sure that we do more of the training of women to make them ready for board, so that there are bench strength of people that understand conflicts of interest. It's a very big and important thing in a listed company. And you can't just arrive there if you have a lot of conflicts with other companies that you represent, and that people understand what is required. Because the thing that hurts most is women being put on a board, sitting in the board meeting and feel intimidated. And we have to grow that timber and bench strength of more and more women that are able to be available, and we have to provide platforms where they can be found. And I think that as a business community, that is our duty, and that is certainly something that we've done with Business Engage this year in the property industry, to launch together with Women's Property Network and Business Engage, and sponsored by Liberty 2 Degrees, is this Women on Boards Masterclass series, so that we're coming out of that with a group of women that practically understands what it means to sit on the board, and how can they just be so much that people don't have a choice to pick from them, because they are all available and well trained and don't have to stand back in any form or fashion.
Thank you very much, Amelia. I think at that point, I'll bring in Lorato. So Lorato, tell me further to what Amelia was saying. No women on boards. Is there a cause for concern, considering that you're also on this program?
I'd absolutely agree with that. I want to take nothing away from the progress that's been made, but certainly it feels like lobbing off a very important limb of your body if you want to operate without women on boards, right? If we just look at the diversity components, it's really about making sure that every single voice is heard. We've got lots and lots of data that proves that diversity is actually the right thing to do. It's not just a benevolent thing to do. We're not doing this because really we're good people. We're doing it because the most diverse companies are operating up to 21% better at the revenue line. Their factors for innovation are much higher. So I really think it would be amiss for organizations to continue to function without women on boards.
Thank you very much for that, Lorato. Perhaps Dr. Jerry, you can come in with your view. Thank you very much.
Yeah. No, I mean, it actually doesn't make sense at all not to use all the resources that you have at a country level, at a company level. To me, it's stupidity. That's what I can call it. We know that women are talented, and we know that by bringing them on board, you're going to have different views. You know that the customers that you serve are diverse. So it just does not make sense to hold on to this notion that you can have a boys' club or a boys' club and to make the best decisions for your customers, your stakeholders. I just think that it's actually nonsense. It should never be the case. We should use the diversity. I mean, we have learned, as Lerato says, the research, I don't care where you look. I mean, we heard earlier, the research just tells you the advantages of bringing diverse thinking. Particularly now we know innovation, creativity. You can't get creativity from just one gender. You need to utilize, as I've said, all the talent, the team players that you have in your company. So it makes no sense.
No, thanks very much. Fully agree with you. And perhaps now we can bring in Cynthia. So Cynthia, welcome. I believe you are looking to give people like Lerato here opportunities to have a taste of board or committee experience. Would you like to briefly tell us about it?
Sure. Thank you very much. And, thank you for inviting me to this very important conversation. So I think, as discussed, the issue of diversity is one that has been topical for a long time. And as much as there have been many initiatives to try and advance this agenda, we at the Mine Workers Investment Company believe that one of the biggest challenges is that companies are looking for women that have experience already. So they set their targets and they say, we are looking for these women. However, they need to have X number of experience on boards, or they need to have experience in this particular sector. On the opposite end of that spectrum, you have women who might have the technical knowledge, but they do not have that experience simply because nobody has given them the experience. So it becomes a circular reference which can't be solved. So what the MIC did in November 2018 is we launched what we call the MIC Board Observer Program. And it's really aimed at addressing the very problem that I outlined. And it's aimed at young Black women. And we really just want to give them an opportunity to get board experience, to be exposed to people with experience, who have had the wisdom of serving on various boards, and to allow them to participate because they do have a voice and they do make very meaningful impact. And at the end of the day, allow them to be able to say, with an opportunity like this, I have experience on this entity. I think for us, it goes beyond just the board experience. We believe that this particular program would also help them to even round off the experience they have in their own careers, just given the nature or the strategic nature of what the board experience provides them. So it also helps them to advance their careers further. And that is something we launched about 3 years ago. And we currently on our third candidate and hopefully are making our small difference to this very important agenda.
Thank you, Cynthia. This was some great insights there. I'd love to hear what the other panelists now think. Do you think MIC are on the right track with this approach? So perhaps, Lerato, we can start with you.
I think it's wonderful. I think this is certainly one of those instances where I'm advocating for peer pressure. Could we please have more organizations kind of thinking in this manner? Because certainly there's no shortage of talent, right? It's just a case of exposure. And the challenge that I'm throwing down the gauntlet for those organizations, as well as for some of the women that already sit on boards, is that the only way that we can make a change is through power, influence, as well as critical mass. So it's very difficult to do it without those things. And when I talk about power, I don't mean the dizzying kind. I mean just the ability to create a meaningful change from whatever it is that you operate. And it doesn't have to be positional as well. So from where I sit, I'm an aspiring board member, certainly within this particular context. But I also acknowledge the role that I play in being able to create that healthy pipeline, even outside of whatever entity that operates out there. We've seen how much representation matters. So I'm hoping that we are creating the waves of change by simply being, which is why I always advocate for psychological safety, which is my ability to show up and be, because in there is true power.
Wonderful, and I can see the passion coming through as you speak. Dr. Jerry?
Yeah, I mean, this
Yes.
is such an important point. I think what MIC is doing is really, really commendable. You cannot create a pipeline out of thin air. You've got to be deliberate about it. You've got to identify, and you've got to set goals and targets for yourself. And you know, this is a space where I just think there's no need to think competitively. If you are developing, as you know, people who want to be on boards, and there are many of them. I mean, last week I was talking to a lady, a qualified person, a PhD, I think it's microbiology, in fact, and she wants to be a director. She's asking me, how do I do this? It's not a competitive space. We as organizations can actually come together and develop programs that will elevate women, because it's a target that we set ourselves as companies in South Africa. So I would just say this is commendable, and I think more and more companies should do it. We must just say we want to identify young people who want to take, this is a big responsibility, and people need to come to it prepared, understanding what it is involved. So I really commend it.
Fantastic. So just do it, is what you're saying. So let's hear from Amelia. What are your views, please, Amelia?
Yeah, I think the Board Observer Program is a absolutely amazing initiative, and it should be something that companies really take on as an example. So very well done on that, Cynthia. I think it reminds me of this concept of if you tell me, I will hear, but if you show me, I will learn. And you cannot learn about a board unless you are sitting inside that boardroom. People can tell you about it, but the experience of being there is incredibly important. And for my own people and people that I work with, I call it the 3 Ps of being on a board. Or being part of a board. The one thing is to prepare. There is nothing that makes you a better board member, more present board member, than really preparing well and knowing what's going on there, so that you can ask questions and you know what's going on. There is no excuse for anyone not to prepare. The second P is around participate. You know, just say something or just ask something. Don't just go to a board meeting and sit there and say nothing. And the last thing is a real practical example that I have for women that want to learn to be on a board is when you ask a question and you are uncertain or you are intimidated, which is often the case. On a board, you are intimidated by people that know a lot more than you do and has got all this confidence, and people mistake confidence for competence sometimes. But when you ask a question, ask an open-ended question, so that it does not land as you are that you saying something that might not be what people want to hear, but it invites and it includes and it brings brings you into the space so that people can engage around that. And I really wish for women to learn that, because that makes such a huge difference to participate on a board on that way. And we have to be vocal about this. We have to not stop spreading this message. We need more women on boards, on listed company boards specifically, and those that don't report around it need to be pushed really hard to do the right thing.
Thank you, Amelia. I guess that's a good segue now for our next question. And Dr. Jerry, I think you can perhaps give us a stab at this one. So we have the JSE listings requirements. Should the government be re-looking at quotas?
Yeah, you know, quotas are always a dicey thing, because it's like a grudge purchase, and people want to run away from it. But I think if we are serious about it, at some point, we may have to go that route, because you give people you say, okay, we're going to rely on your goodwill, as it were, to do this, but nothing happens. And I think you get pushed at some point. You can't just, do the same thing and hope for a better result. So at some point, you need to say, okay, enough is enough. We're now going to take it one gear up, further so that we can achieve the targets or the results that we want to see. I think we may eventually get there. I know that there's been, stops and starts. Do we do it? Don't we do it? It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be, given all the evidence that we have. A board should just do the right thing. But I would say if they don't, I can see this coming down because, down the pipe. First of all, your women are a majority. You can look at whatever, so they are your majority customers. It basically means if we don't do it, we don't care, right? That's what we don't care about them as customers, as citizens. And at some point, the government would have to take that drastic step of saying, okay, guys, we've had enough of this. And they would have to have the muscle to actually push that through. But for now, it's actually elevating the information. When you celebrate those that are moving the needle forward. And you spotlight those companies that are not doing anything about it. Maybe if we have this, I was actually thinking about this. If we had an incentive for companies, what would happen? The companies that are doing well, if you had an incentive as a government, what would happen there? I'm sure there could be movement.
No, good insights. And I also appreciate the notion of the grudge purchase. What's your views, Lerato? Should government be relooking at quotas?
Yeah, I mean, much to Dr. Jerry's sentiments, I know quotas kind of bring up certain emotions inside people. But just from a pure data and analytics perspective, what gets measured gets done. So without overcomplicating that or trying to oversimplify it really is one of those that becomes kind of the incentive component to say what happens if you do it right, and what's the size of the stick if you don't do it, as it were. So really, I'm saying we're heading down that path because boards continue to ignore the massive amounts of research that is available that actually says do not do it from the goodness of your heart. Do it because of this bottom line that we care so very deeply about.
Definitely. And I think so balancing the carrot and the stick is really what we're also trying to do. Okay, great. So let's also hear from Amelia, please. What are your thoughts? We do have the JSE listing requirements. Should the government be relooking at quotas?
I think, as Lerato and Dr. Jerry said, quotas are somehow makes people resentful and it becomes a tick box exercise. What I think is important is that investors and shareholders should take a position up here and they should vote with their money.
I will just go in order.
And I think it's really important that not only companies play and companies take up that responsibility, but shareholder activism around this become important, and someone picks up this from that point of view, so that there's a real incentive for everyone to do it. And I think that would probably get a better sustainable outcome in the long term.
Whatever. Thank you, Dr. Amelia. So can we please also hear from Cynthia, please? What are your thoughts on should the government be relooking at quotas? And perhaps you can also start touching on whether targets are useful or not.
Yeah, so I think I share Amelia's views. I think the most effective way is if stakeholders such as shareholders push for this agenda. However, I think given that we will get to a point if companies, to Lerato's point, continue to heed what should be done, where quotas might need to be introduced. But ideally, you would like companies to be incentivized by the mere reason that it really improves not just their bottom line, but it also contributes to their succession planning, which is important from a board sustainability perspective. And perhaps just to touch on your next question around the targets, I think targets are very important. I think for me, it's important to be able to measure where companies are or what progress is being made, and if progress is not being made, how that can be rectified in the following reporting season, call it. And I think over and above setting targets, what is very important is the public accountability that comes with reporting such targets. And I think for me, those two go hand in hand, because in the absence of targets, then we will continue having these conversations where we acknowledge a need for something to happen, but we don't actually measure ourselves to say, how are we doing? What shall we do differently? So targets are critical in summary.
Thank you for that. So, Lerato, I see you have been agreeing. Would you like to share some of your thoughts on that?
I think what just resonated there quite beautifully is the public accountability component. I think just from a human nature perspective, we really don't want to be othered, which is a concept I'm borrowing from my diversity and inclusion work. Really, we don't want to be othered. Therefore, if we create the infrastructure around organizations that says, if you do this kind of work or exhibit these kinds of traits, this is something that we will celebrate as kind of your immediate ecosystem and beyond. I think that's a great leverage that we can use more so than just kind of trying to throw the gauntlet down with the quotas. And but the targets remain absolutely critical. I couldn't agree more with that.
Dr. Jerry, your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts are that companies really need to be careful. The workforce is transitioning, right? The populations are transitioning. If we don't do the right thing now, remember your stakeholders are changing, and the young people have different values from the baby boomers and the rest of them. And I think there's going to just come a time, we know this thing in South Africa in particular, people get fed up, right? And you don't know what they're going to do when they're fed up. So responsible organizations, I think, should just understand, should scan the environment, see what is happening, and put the necessary actions. This hypocrisy that we value this, we value that, we have these values, but we don't practice them, I think it just makes us, we're not real. It makes us fake. So responsible board members should make this an agenda and should put plans in place to ensure it is executed. I think the time for talking and talking and talking is actually over. People should demonstrate by practical steps that, okay, I'm very proud to be part of companies that where those plans are, because this thing can be done. It's not like it cannot be done. And if you don't plan it, you're going to fail, right? And the fail, unfortunately, is not seen within 2 years, 3 years. It's a long-term thing. You see it in 5 years and onwards that we have actually failed. So putting the steps now in preparation for the future, I think, is the thing that we need to be doing as organizations.
No, thanks for that. And then perhaps just staying with you,
Yeah.
how then do we deal, if at all, with those companies that are actually not reporting?
Yeah, that's so disappointing. It's actually quite disappointing that in an environment of transformation, an environment of change, where reporting is a global standard, that you still have companies that just look at this and say, no, this is a game. I think it's unfair to the organization. In fact, they are not thinking about their longevity as an organization. If you don't do that, if you don't report, because reporting is not for external parties, actually. It's first for you. You don't prepare a report and just throw it away and don't care about it. It's for you as an organization to look and say, are we making progress? Why are we not making progress? I think it may actually, if you don't report to yourselves and, of course, to external stakeholders, and this is where this activism also has to come in, because eventually, if you don't do that, it's going to catch up with you. That would be my caution. If you don't report to yourselves and to external stakeholders, there's just going to come a time where it catches up with you, and it would be too late.
No, thanks for that. Fully agreed. Cynthia, perhaps you can come in and give us your views. I saw you nodding as well.
Yeah, no, I think reporting is critical. Otherwise, there is measurement, there is no accountability, and we can't assess the progress that we're making. So there needs to be consequences for not reporting, and I haven't really thought through what those could be, but it really is just the responsible thing to do, and otherwise we are never going to make any progress on this journey.
Yeah, and I suppose it's also about holding people accountable through the reporting. Cynthia, what are your views? Thanks for that. And then Amelia, coming to you. What's your view on that?
My view is quite simple. You can't just as a company decide you're not going to publish your financial statements and you're not going to report your financials. So this is no different. So there needs to be an accountable body that makes sure that this happens. And I think the JSE plays a great role in all our lives and can continue to make sure that companies report this. If you don't submit your financials, there are consequences. If you don't report on your gender representation, I think there needs to be consequences. I don't know. I believe in the goodness of the human race. So I don't know that anyone gets up in the morning and decides we're going to put any women ever on our boards. It's not on the agenda. It doesn't get pushed hard enough. It's not in front of people because there are such incredibly good stories of where women are on boards. They play such unbelievable roles. And if we can tell more of those stories and people can share those successes and we can celebrate that, we have to celebrate those successes that we do every day. Those that don't do it will start feeling left behind and feel that they miss out on something. And it's that FOMO factor that we have to almost create, that they're so desperate to have a woman on their board because it seems like they're missing out on something.
No, great FOMO, interesting perspective on the fear of missing out. And any of the panelists, do any of you have like a hard suggestion on what could the consequence be or what should the consequence be?
Well, my view would be that if you can't have direct consequences, your consumers, your stakeholders are going to put those consequences on you or as an organization. The state has the big stick and of course can also have the big carrot. But I'm not sure that, because remember, one of the things that we want to create is an environment that is conducive to attracting more and more investors into the thing. So you want to be careful when you raise that big stick. But behind the scenes, I think the state can cajole, the JSE can do the same. As Amelia was saying, push. All of us can push. I mean, ultimately, it is the consumer or the stakeholders, particularly the consumer, that's going to say, okay, we're fed up, enough is enough. And that would be the consequence.
Lorato?
Just my view, I want to touch on just this notion of the war on talent.
Yes.
If there is a war on talent, there's no way that you're going to be winning if your picture of the future doesn't necessarily represent a lot of people. If people can't see themselves in who you are as an entity and how you deliver to your own clients and the ecosystem within which you operate. So really as a tool for survival, I'm not even talking about thriving, I'm just talking about survival. This is really, really important as a needle to be able to move. So I'm very wary of people that don't understand, what perception, ergo reality means to them in their lives. You can't be that much internally focused to a point of being able to ignore some of these cues that are coming from outside, especially if a lot of them are in fact positive. Cynthia's given us a lot, Amelia's given us a lot. There's a lot that's positive that's going on. So it's not a bad bus to jump on. So there shouldn't be a reluctance. So yeah, that's my view.
No, great. Okay, so then on the next one, I guess I'll bring in our panelists that are online again. So the Hampton Alexander Review in the UK notes executive placements as a problem area. How do we approach that subject here? So Cynthia or Amelia, happy to hear from you guys, and then we'll bring in our guest in studio.
I think Lorato talked about the war on talent. And I think the war on talent describes this executive placement very clearly and simply. It's hard enough as it is to find, in the current environment, women to come into businesses because they've got so much demands on them all over. So it's our duty to create environments where women can not be successful at all costs. It's a very important thing for me that you can't sacrifice everything else just to be a woman in business and a woman on board. So it is our duty to create those environments where you can do that, plus do all your other responsibilities that you have as mothers and homemakers and those things that are important for this country, for this, for raising children that become responsible adults, and have a generation that understands that women have to be everywhere. But if we continue to make it so difficult, our children watch that and say, "No, I don't want to do that. You know, it's too difficult." And so it starts in the heart of business, making business environments so that women can work there, can thrive, and eventually that gets up to a board level, and you know, the same things apply there. And executive placements are no different from that. We just need to make sure that they don't continue to fish in the same pond. We must widen this pond, and the work that Business Engage are doing, Women's Property Network, other companies, the examples that Cynthia cited, those for me are the important things, because it's proactive steps that we are creating to create a much bigger pond of people that can come from, so it's much easier to get them in there.
Okay, thank you. And so because we are running into the almost end of this as well, Cynthia, any last points from your side? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think for me, you know, as the doctor said earlier, there's been a lot of talking, and we need to get to a point where we convert that talking into action. I think there are many misconceptions around this topic that need to be demystified. So issues around, where do you find these women? And I think my simple point is that we're not a rare species. There are many, many people, women, young women that are talented. All we need to do is to find alternative ways of identifying them, whether it's programs like the MIC, whether it's our networks, whether it's, you know, the work that Business Engage is doing, so that we don't have the same names coming up in terms of a board appointment. So if we make the effort, we will find this amazing talent that just needs to be unearthed and provided with the platform for them to shine. So I think it's really more about making the effort and not put hurdles in front of us, you know, before we even attempt anything. It's not impossible. I think, like anything, it always looks impossible until it's done. Let's focus our efforts on action and stop the talking, would be my concluding remarks.
No, wonderful. Thanks, ladies. So, Larato, and then we'll end on the gentleman. 30 seconds. Anything from your side?
I think for me, I just want to just touch on the fact that the work is actually even that much easier. You don't have to unearth the women talent. We are unearthing ourselves. We are putting our hands up. We're doing all sorts of things to attract attention to ourselves and say, I'm ready, I'm good to go. And I think it's whether it's bias, conscious or unconscious, whether it's a perceived lack of readiness, whatever it is, my encouragement is to just try it. The work that the MIC are doing, creating these kind of voyeuristic opportunities for us to see what happens on boards without necessarily being on them, that kind of stuff is going to create monumental shifts in how we even think about participation, because it's then going to move beyond just the women. I spent almost 17 years in a corporate career, and the other day I was asked by a youngster, and they asked me, Larato, why do you talk so much about psychological safety? And my comment was, because I spent 17 years feeling psychologically unsafe, whether it was age, whether it was race, whether it was gender, it was sexual orientation, it was all sorts of things, but I felt incredibly unsafe in those spaces until such time that either courage or somebody actually bulldozed a wall for me and said, you are free to walk through. So our responsibility is multi-level to be able to create those opportunities, but also listen to people who are actively saying, I'm good to go, I just don't have the requisite skills to be able to do it, but I'm ready to learn. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
30 seconds to you, Dr.
Yeah,
Jerry.
well,
Then
okay.
unfortunately
Just
we
two
have to
points.
go.
2
Yes,
points. Have a development plan for how you're going to do succession planning for your board. Start that 5 years before so that you can do the right things. Thirdly, or secondly, sorry, only 2 points. 2 points. So the last point is that it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a whole village to raise a board member, an effective board member. Let us do that. Let's create the conducive environment, and we're going to raise very good, effective board members who are female.
Wonderful. Thank you to our panel. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks so much. Okay, that now brings us to the question of where do we go from here? Malcolm?
Okay, thank you. Can I have a screen, please? Okay, so when we started out with the research, we advised that we were building the benchmark for future research. One of the problems was that we realised that we were going to face was that of data collection and retention. Whether we wanted to branch out to other geographic areas across Africa, which we do, other categories like executives in the pipeline, which we do, then gathering the information was going to be problematic. To that end, Business Engage has begun developing our own in-house server capabilities, which will allow us to collect and store huge amounts of data effortlessly and seamlessly and sustainably. So when I say we, I use that term very, very loosely. I'm a Luddite. That's for the younger generation to sort out, and our son, who's building his own AI platform, is in charge of that. So we'll sit down in the coming weeks with our partners and plan the way forward, but it will be expansive, it will be relevant, and it'll be hugely exciting. And we must acknowledge that we live in an interesting times, and we need to make the most of them. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Malcolm. And I think as we come to a conclusion, just to say a special thanks to you and Colleen for the great work that you're doing in bringing issues of gender mainstreaming to the fore. And also reiterate thanks to all of our guests that have joined us. And then lastly, perhaps just to reflect on a quote from Barack Obama, who says, "Empowering women is not only the right thing to do, it is the smart thing to do." So with that, stay safe, stay smart, and thank you very much. Goodbye.